Hello and welcome. I'm Michael Romita, the President and CEO of the Westchester County Association, the collective voice of Westchester's professional community. Thanks for spending your Friday afternoon happy hour with me and with Jan Fisher, the Executive Director of Nonprofit Westchester. We are very fortunate to be co-hosting this event tonight with New York's first ever Senate Majority Leader, Senator Chuck Schumer. Now, we've collected your online questions to curate what we believe will be an interactive dialogue with the Senator on the issues that you have identified as most important for our regional economy. Issues that are important for both businesses and nonprofits. If you have additional questions during the program, please use the Q&A function and not the chat function. Time permitting, we'll try and get to some of those questions as well. A special thanks to all of the elected officials who are joining us this evening, and of course, their staffs, including Megan Glander, Nicole Vergonia, and the rest of Senator Chuck Schumer's team. Now, I'd like to turn things over quickly to County Executive George Latimer for a special welcome.
Thank you very much, Michael and Jan. We're very honored here in Westchester to have our friend, United States Senator Chuck Schumer, with us. Senator Schumer has been a part of our world for quite a while. He's gone to bat for us, not just as a government, but all of the various organizations. He's a constant visitor here. And it's sometimes amazing to think that he knows every one of the counties in the state the way he knows us, and as well now the United States of America, so that he knows every member of that Senate. And so much has been placed on his shoulders. But we want the Senator to know not only is he always at home here in Westchester whenever he visits, but that we are there to help support him in the initiatives that he's taking on. It's a massive task, but we're appreciative that he's our senator, and we're appreciative that he's in this role of leadership. Chuck, you have our love and our support.
Thank you very much, George, and thank you for the great job you do. Am I on now? Am I ready to roll?
I am on now, and it is really my honor and my pleasure to introduce you, U.S. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. Today, we welcome you to Westchester in what is a unique collaboration among the business and nonprofit sectors to discuss intersecting issues that affect all people who live and work in our great county. Today is also an opportunity to thank you for your most recent and hard-fought efforts on behalf of New York State, and for decades of service to the people of our country, state, and county, standing up for issues that support a robust economy and protect human rights and dignity, matters that we will discuss in further depth today. Thank you for joining us, and we now look forward to hearing from you about your goals and many accomplishments on behalf of your constituents. Welcome.
Thank you, Jan, and thank you for the great work you do for Nonprofit Westchester, and to Mike on WCA. And I'm so glad to be part of this collaboration. And a special shout out to George Latimer, who's just a classy county executive, and we're always working together to benefit your county. I thought I want to thank everyone also here on the Zoom. Everyone here has jobs, has families, the ups and downs of life that God visits on every one of us. It's Friday night, but you're here because you care, and that gives me a lot of strength and a lot of hope. As you know, this is my first time talking to all of you as Majority Leader, first Majority Leader from the state of New York, and I am going to do what I've always done. Even as my responsibilities in Washington increase, I'm never going to forget locality and New York. I fight very hard for it. Just this week, we secured $4 million for substance use and mental health services for both Mount Vernon and Peekskill through the Westchester Jewish Community Services, one of the great and many nonprofits who are here. So I thank everybody for being on. I'm first going to tell a little story. I like to begin with this. January 6th. Which I would just label, at least for me and many, to use the sentence in Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. January 5th, as you know, was the elections in Georgia. I was on tenterhooks knowing that if we won those two seats, I would become majority leader. As Tuesday night bled into Wednesday morning. They hadn't declared winner. I was still up, punching into the computer every 30 seconds. What's new in Chatham County? How'd we do in DeKalb County? Finally, at 4 a.m., it was revealed that both Warnock and Ossoff had won, and I would be majority leader. My first reaction, as you could imagine, was joy. Every one of us has experienced, has had a goal. A very important goal to us that we set to reach. And you struggle and work, and there are logs in your path, detours you have to take. But when you finally get there, the feeling of joy is hard to describe. But the second emotion I had just a few minutes later was one that was a little different. My second reaction on attaining this post was one of awe. Awe, not in the sense my teenage daughters used to use it. Gee, Dad, your coat looks awesome. But awe in the biblical sense. When in the Bible, when the angels saw the face of God, they trembled in awe. And I was almost trembling, realizing the enormous responsibility placed on my shoulders and the shoulders of our Democratic majority. We have the COVID crisis to overcome. We have the economy to get going. And a question I always ask myself, why did so many people vote for a man like Donald Trump? And forgetting your politics, left, right, or center, a man who was so dishonest, so divisive, a despicable president. And I realized that it was our job as leaders to pave a successful path to the future so that people wouldn't have a sour, pessimistic attitude about America and turn to negativity, but rather could move forward. So it was almost a economic, political, and moral mission that was placed on our shoulders. And those two emotions sort of coursed through my veins at the same time. I went to bed at about 4:30 a.m. I couldn't sleep much. Woke up at 7, got in the car, drove down to DC. I was on the floor of the Senate at 1 p.m. And I'm hardly on the floor for an hour as putative majority leader, no speeches, nothing like that. And a police officer clad in a big bulletproof vest, a submachine gun across his waist, grabs me firmly by the collar. I'll never forget that grip. And he says, "Senator, we're in danger. You're coming with me." And some of you may have seen this. They showed this in the film on tape at the trial of Trump. It was from the overhead cameras. I hadn't seen it, but I was walking briskly out one door to the right of the Senate chamber. And 10 seconds later, I'm seen running the other way. We were within about 20 feet of these insurrectionists, these vile people who took over the Capitol. Had one of them had a gun, Lord knows what would have happened. So that was my day, best of times, worst of times. But now I'm focused on that awesome responsibility. I want to go over with you briefly some of the things that we got done in the COVID bill and in the CARES bill, some of the things upcoming, and then leave the rest of it to your questions. I'll leave the rest of the time for your questions. So in the CARES, I always, in every formula we put together, I fight hard for New York. New York's in my veins. Every part of it, I love it. I just love New York. And we always try to help. In the first CARES bill, which I negotiated largely with Secretary Mnuchin, we got over $100 billion in dedicated funding to New York. And we put this money to good use. I was able to get the counties some money. Westchester got $168 million. Not just give the state money, which needs it, but give the counties money as well. And then, but the trouble with that bill, which had so much in it, was we thought COVID would expire by the summer. That would be it. And when it did, we needed more relief. But unfortunately, Mitch McConnell and the Republican majority in the Senate said no. But very close to the end in December, we passed another bill. And here are some of the things in it that have just passed. $600 in direct payments to low and middle income individuals. We wanted more. And now we're fighting to get that up to $2,000 for any family whose income is below 150, who individuals below 75,000. We extended unemployment benefits worth $300 extended. We got $69 billion in vaccines to help distribute vaccines and tests. $88 billion in education funding for our K-12 schools to open safely. $25 billion in rent relief, of which Westchester got $23 million. And you can't just do an eviction moratorium. You got to give people who have no job some money, or after 3 months of the moratorium, they owe 3 months rent. What are they going to do? $10 billion for childcare, $7 billion for broadband access, $13 billion for SNAP, another $4 billion for the MTA, including Metro North. So far, we got them 8, 4 in the first bill, 4 in the second. We're going to get another 6 and change in the third. That's why the MTA said they wouldn't have to lay off people or cut back on service. We got $4 million for Westchester County Airport. And probably most importantly for this group, well, we got $325 billion for businesses, small business and nonprofit. And incidentally, Jan, in the original CARES bill, they were just going to give it to small businesses. I said you have to give it to nonprofits as well. A, they're 20% of our economy. And B, they provide all the relief that's needed during a COVID crisis. And so we did. And but in the new bill, we renewed it. $284 billion in PPP loans. These are second loans. If you didn't get a first loan, small business people, nonprofits, you can get 2 loans. If you got the first one, apply to the second. If you got rejected on the first, you can apply for both. And that applies also to our religious institutions, churches and synagogues and mosques, no collection plates. And they do a lot of social service, so they're eligible. A lot of them don't know it, but there are. We also put a set aside for what's called CDFIs and MDIs, Community Development Financial Institutions and MDIs. They can help our smaller businesses apply for these things. A lot of small businesses, I empathize, by the way, Michael, with small business people. My dad had a little exterminating business, not very successful. He paced the floor Sunday nights at 2 a.m. Because he hated his job. So I know what people go through. He's a funny guy. He's 97 now. He says, I'm 97. I was an exterminator. How bad could DDT have been? But in any case, so I sympathize, and I know. We also got money in the Save Our Stages program for our arts institutions, another great part of our economy. They were suffering because no one went. You couldn't gather people closely together. And places like the Pelham Picture House and the Bedford Playhouse and the Capitol Theater in Port Jeff and Jacob Burns in Pleasantville are going to get money through this. I made sure our cultural institutions were allowed, had a lot of resistance from that, as well as money in Save Our Stages to help Broadway. So this was a very good bill. It's passed for New York. Now we're working on the Biden rescue plan that goes even better. $350 billion for state and local relief. Our state government needs help, and our local governments. 40% of the money goes direct to localities, Mr. County George, Mr. County Executive, Mr. Latimer. 40% goes directly to you. The state, when they get the money, they sometimes don't give it to you, even though they're supposed to distribute it to the localities. You know that all too well. And so we do. And so there will be significant dollars for New York State and for our localities. There's $170 billion more for our schools so that they can open safely. The goal is every school be open as soon as possible, but every school be open 5 days a week by September. There is more money for rental and mortgage assistance, childcare, $40 billion, Jan. I know you have a lot of agencies who get involved in childcare. Money, we have a desperate need for childcare with so many people with COVID and affected by COVID. And maybe and 2 more very significant things. There's money for our restaurants. The first amendment I allowed on the floor, because the majority leader, as you know, has enormous power. He can determine, or she can determine, what bills go to the floor. When McConnell had it, he didn't let much go on the floor. That's why we call the Senate the legislative graveyard. But the first amendment I allowed on the floor was a bipartisan amendment by Sinema, a Democrat from Arizona, Wicker, a Republican from Mississippi, for the restaurants. The same thing we did for Save Our Stages, we're going to do for our restaurants, which are hurting just as badly. People aren't showing up. So there's 25 billion, both Save Our Stages for arts institutions and nonprofits of that type, and the restaurants is a 6-month grant that you can use very flexibly. So it will help. There's also, I saw someone on the chat, we gave some of the higher education, the money for education, about 25% of it goes to higher education. There was originally going to only have it to the public institutions. I said, no, the private institutions need help too. So they both get money under this. And so the restaurants. And the final thing that's maybe most important, there's a massive program for vaccines. That's very, very important. $160 billion. And the Biden administration is going to take over giving the vaccines. You know, when the states and localities have to do with their supply chain issues, there is information issues, and there's not enough vaccines. They're going to set up centers throughout the country. There'll be many of them in Westchester, where the federal government dispenses the vaccines. It'll be the people who will work there will be FEMA employees, National Guard, and they're going to hire about 100,000 temporary healthcare workers. And the criteria will be much less. So, you know, I've heard stories, people are online for hours. I have a thyroid, thyroid's not listed as a pre-existing condition, or I'm 64. No, you can't get it. You got to turn back. Now we will have it. And it is estimated that once they do this, and there's a guy named Zients who's in charge, who's great. He was the one who fixed the computers when the Obama healthcare problem occurred. It is estimated that by late summer, maybe even middle summer, and very optimistically early summer, there will be enough vaccinations that life will turn back to will come back to normal. Let's hope that's true. We're going to do everything we can to make that happen. One other thing, the PPP eligibility I now made available with others' help for the large nonprofits, the YMCAs, the Habitat for Humanities, the community centers who were left out before get it. And so do the 501c6s, 5s, 4s. You guys, you can get PPP money too. So it's a big improvement from what happened before. There's a lot more in these bills. I'm leaving a great deal out, but one more thing that I feel particularly, well, I'll leave it out. Okay, there's a lot in these bills, but I know you have a lot of questions, so why don't we get to questions?
Thanks, Senator. Yeah, there's a lot of ground to cover, so I appreciate you cutting your remarks short so you could get to some of the questions. The way this will work, we've broken this down into 3 discussion topics. The first one, I'll lead the discussion, and then I'll turn it over to Jan for a discussion more on some of the issues that she's following more closely. To talk about COVID, right after the CARES Act came out, the Westchester County Association took the position immediately after passage of the CARES Act that trillions more would be necessary.
Yes.
And we're at $4 trillion and counting. This is getting really expensive. How are we going to pay for this?
Okay, well, these are good questions, but let me say a few things about this. First, most of the economists, Janet Yellen, Treasury Secretary, but Powell, hardly a wide-eyed liberal, say we need more put into the economy, more significantly put into the economy to get out of the mess. Our unemployment rate, it's listed officially at 6.5%, but if you take all the people who are not looking for jobs, it's over 10%. Certain industries, the restaurants, entertainment, travel, are deeply affected and much, much lower than they should be. The great danger, and this was said by Powell, by Yellen, and by most, not all economists, some of the conservative ones don't, the danger of undershooting is much less than the danger of overshoot. The danger of undershooting is much greater than the danger of overshooting. And I have the experience of 2009. Democrats sat down with Republicans and wanted to pass a bipartisan bill. And they so cut the amount of money that was available that the recession lasted 4 or 5 years. We didn't get back to job growth till many years later that where we were before the financial crisis hit. We do not want to repeat that mistake. So here's what Powell said. The economic recovery remains uneven and far from complete, and the path ahead is highly uncertain, and he's a very serious state guy. So I believe this is the right amount of money. Now, what about the deficit, you ask? If we don't get this economy recovering, the deficit will be worse. There'll be fewer tax revenues, fewer money into the account. And I'd make one other point, which is controversial, but I put it out there for you to consider. There is now a theory among a growing number of economists. I think there's a professor at Columbia named Toohey who leads the charge, that the deficit reduction is no longer as important as it once was. They point out that between 2008 and 5-10 years later, I forget how many, $4 trillion was pumped into the economy by the federal government. Now, it wasn't fiscal, so everyone forgets it was monetary. But when the Fed kept interest rates so low, when the Fed bought all this paper and pushed money into the economy, guess what has been the result on interest rates up till 2016 and even now? Nothing. What has been the effect on inflation? Nothing. Prices are not going up. And the theory, you can buy it or not, is that in an international, technologically driven, far more efficient economy, deficits are not as important. I would say they may become more important 5 or 10 years from now, but right now, if we were to undershoot here, that's the greater danger. So we're not paying for this, but you never do with a stimulus. A stimulus, if the stimulus, you take in as much money as you go back, it's not a as you put back, it's not a stimulus. And that's the general thinking and the general theory, not universal at all, but worth it. But I do worry about the economy not coming back quickly more than I do of inflation roaring back in the next year or two.
So the metaphor is, if the house is burning down, you're not so concerned in real time how you're going to pay for the hose.
You got it.
You'll get to that after the fact.
Yeah. If we sit there and argue about the hose, the house will be gone.
Yeah. But there's still a lot of stuff that's not in the COVID relief package, stuff that was negotiated or discussed at least prior to the first of the year, prior to the change in the Senate. And one of those things was liability protection for businesses and other organizations, which still remains important for businesses up here in Westchester. I know that Jan has a difference with respect to the nonprofits. This is not something that's being talked about as far as the current legislation. You probably have a pretty short answer, but what is the status of this? And do you expect that it will be in a package?
No, we spent 6 months arguing about it in the last COVID bill. And I don't think it'll be in the new package. Frankly, the number of lawsuits that have been pushed is at the moment not very large. Will it get larger? I don't know, but there's nothing in this bill.
Okay, so we do COVID relief probably through reconciliation, and then we move on to what's next on your agenda and the president's agenda, and that's infrastructure. Yes. So, many people tuned in wondering what your personal priorities are for an infrastructure package, and how that would play into helping and assisting the lower Hudson Valley.
Great. Yeah, there's the president in Build Back Better has a big priority on infrastructure. A lot of it is green and deals with the changes in climate. Every bit of it has to be resilient, but infrastructure is the core, although there are other things that are in that bill. Job training. There are a lot of people whose jobs post-COVID will never come back. We got to train them for new jobs, as well as science. I have something called the Endless Frontiers Act, bipartisan with Todd Young, a Republican, that invests in the pure sciences, where right now we have declined our investment. And, when we invested in NSF, tech became one of the largest employers in the country. When we invested in NIH, pharmaceutical led the world. We've fallen on that. China's doing much more. If we don't, we're going to lose cutting edge jobs 5 and 10 years from now. So that's part of it too. But infrastructure is the core of the bill, green infrastructure. Lots of things we want to get done. One of the top things is the Gateway Tunnel. That's the tunnel under the Hudson. As you know, those tunnels are 100 years old. They're waterlogged. After Sandy, salt water got in, and they're not going to last for much longer. And if those tunnels collapse, the whole economy of the New York region but also the whole Northeast collapses because you can't get from Boston to Washington probably without taking a rowboat or a barge if these do. I put in a lot of money into Sandy, but Donald Trump, in his vindictive way, wouldn't let it go through. At one point, he said, well, if you give me the wall, maybe I'll give you the gateway. That's the kind of mentality we had here. And so it's ready to go. And I am working right now with the Department of Transportation to sign the documents for the EISs and the other documents that need to be gone through. And I'm hopeful we can get Gateway going quickly. Very important. The Deputy Transportation Commissioner was Moynihan's transportation legislative assistant. When he retired, he told her it would be a good idea to go work for Schumer. Thank God she did for 9 years. Then she was New York City's DOT commissioner, and now she's the deputy secretary. That's important. Another thing in this is the New Rochelle line, which is very important to Westchester. I've spoken with Secretary Buttigieg about prioritizing federal funding for the link in downtown New Rochelle, and everyone knows what it would do. Convert a portion of the Memorial Highway into a linear transportation and park space. And so, you know, if we have a large infrastructure bill, we can do a lot of things that the localities can't afford because these projects are big. Here's another thing in this bill to show you what we can do in a green sense, but in a job sense. And I'm very proud of this. It's called Clean Cars for America. I came up with this, and Biden's put it in his Build Back Better. And the idea is you get a rebate, point of sale rebate, when you turn in your internal combustion engine and buy an electric car. Then the federal government builds charging stations by your home and across the country so that you'll be able to drive from Westchester to San Diego and not worry about running out of juice. And we give subsidies to Ford and GM so they can have the best battery storage and the best cars. The beauty of this is the goal is to not produce any more internal combustion engines after 2030, and none will be on the road after 2040. And listen to who's supporting it. This is what I'm so proud of. Most of the major environmental groups, from the more moderate to the more progressive, the more liberal, the unions, they're the first time the unions are supporting a major climate bill. And UAW, IBEW, AFL-CIO is for it, and so is Ford and GM. It's the kind of thing I'm looking for, bipartisan things that I can put on the floor of the Senate. And because this has business and labor support, as well as the support of the majority of Americans who really want to see us do something about climate, it has a good chance of passing. Another thing we're trying to do, if I'm going too long, but there's so much in this bill. One I want is broadband. We need to invest a lot of dollars to build out broadband. Congress has now appropriated some money to do that. In this new bill, we have more, but much of it is in the Build Back Better. The goal, Franklin Roosevelt said in the 30s, every home should have electricity. It's a necessity. Well, high-speed internet is a necessity in the 21st century. Lots of homes don't have it. Many in rural areas, but many in inner city areas. A lot of Yonkers and Mount Vernon don't have broadband. They're left out. We should make sure everyone has broadband.
Senator, I'm glad you brought that up because many of the federal programs do focus primarily on rural areas and overlook, in many cases, the suburban market where the need is just as great.
Just as
I'm glad
great.
you brought that up.
And I love the coalition. Rural, get some Republican votes. Urban, suburban, get Democratic votes. Bring them together.
So one thing that's as important to Westchester, as important to Westchester as infrastructure, is the SALT deduction.
Yes.
And a lot of people are asking about that. And I know that you have sponsored a bill along with our freshman congressperson, Mondaire Jones, who works on the House side. But what is the vehicle for getting this passed? I mean, right now it's a standalone bill. You know, it's out there for messaging. How do we get this through?
Okay. In this first bill, the American Rescue Plan, which I hesitate to call ARP, you know, it sounds silly, ARP, but that's the initials. I think of the world according to GARP. Remember that one? So I don't like to call it ARP. But in any case, this is for we people who knew that book, right, Mike?
John Irving, sure.
Yeah, good for you. In any case, the next bill, the Build Back Better, is much broader. And it will involve tax changes, which this bill doesn't. An extremely high priority of mine is to get rid of the cap on the SALT deduction. It was done in a nasty, vindictive way by Republicans to stick it to the blue states. That's what they said, because the blue states tend to be more generous in terms of their social programs, in terms of Jan's sector. And that's a good thing, not a bad thing. Gives people ladders up, gives people hope, gives people a chance. But they stuck it to us, and it was nasty. And there are lots of states that are affected. The county, I think, that may be the most affected by this of all the counties, certainly in New York and maybe in the country, is Westchester, because of the high tax rate. And the idea that it just affects rich people is ridiculous. You live in, Peekskill, and one person's a firefighter and one person's a nurse. They're paying a ton in taxes. They need this help, and they're not high income. They're middle income in New York standards. So it's an extremely high priority, and we're pushing for it in the second bill. First bill, we'd like to get it in, but there are no tax implications. So we're not doing taxes in this first bill.
Please remind Senator McConnell that on a net level, money flows out of the state of New York and into states like his.
You got it. They don't care. They're just, oh, here's a great one. When I was fighting for money for Sandy, which you needed in Westchester, I remember visiting Mamaroneck and the whole Long Island Sound coast, which was so devastated. Guess who the two loudest voices against giving New York any money were? Ted Cruz and John Cornyn, senators from Texas, and the governor from Texas. Now they're desperate for money during their situation. I mean, the hypocrisy is enormous. But anyway, we're going to fight for SALT.
Thanks, Senator.
We're not fighting for SALT. We're fighting to get rid of the cap on SALT.
Thank you. I'm going to turn things over to Jan Fisher. She's got a lot of material to cover as well. Just one quick plug for the folks who've tuned in from the healthcare sector. Certainly, there was a lot of help in some of the earlier stimulus packages for healthcare providers, but they're still struggling. And with consumers struggling, the healthcare sector struggling, there is one sector that's doing particularly well during the pandemic, and that's the healthcare insurance sector, the for-profit care sector. So please keep that in mind as you think about future legislation.
I wrote the law. I helped write the law that gave our hospitals and our other healthcare providers a lot of money in each of those bills. Talk to Montefiore, which has a lot of people employed in institutions in your district. And many of these hospitals would have had real trouble and had massive layoffs if we hadn't funneled money into them. And again, I tried to write the formulas so it helped the healthcare institutions of New York in particular.
Thank you, Senator.
And
now we're going to move to Jan Fisher and discussion topic 2.
One interesting thing.
Yep.
When Senator Moynihan retired, he was a mentor to me. He said, I want you to, he actually, 3 days after I beat D'Amato, he called me to his office and he said, now that you've won, I'm going to announce I'm not going to run again in 2 years. And because you can continue my legacy. And the two things he charged me with was help our New York hospitals and help our transportation. So there you go. We touched on both of those.
And I'll add a third, help our nonprofits, Jan.
Thank you. And a perfect segue. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit, but because the nonprofit sector, as you said, is so broad and so big and represents many different types of businesses. But one thing that impacts us all, whether you're a for-profit or a nonprofit or in higher education, is what the COVID pandemic has so brutally displayed and made painfully clear that racial equity is still something we are far from achieving in this country. Data and facts demonstrate that COVID-19 has had a disproportionate and deadly toll on communities of color.
Yep.
And this is the result of, among other things, decades-long government-sanctioned and exclusionary practices and policies in healthcare, housing, education, the workforce, and more. We need to get serious about this issue. My question to you is, how do you use the power and economic resources of the federal government to meaningfully advance an equitable economy, healthcare system, and other intersecting systems? And how do we address the digital divide in education and provide equitable opportunity for all our country's youth to succeed? And I will have a follow-up question about immigration and immigrant rights, but I give you this question now.
Okay, so I'll put immigration aside for the moment and we'll get to it. It's very important to me. But you are right. You know, I give a speech on MLK Day about Martin Luther King, and I say, on his broad shoulders, he hoisted up a giant mirror. And with his eloquence, with his brilliance, and with his faith, he forced America to look in that mirror for the first time. And America didn't see what it liked and saw the bigotry and discrimination and began the slow path where we still have a long way to go to change. COVID, in a different way, did the same thing. It shined a light on the inequities in our society. Healthcare at the top of the list. Why did so many more people of color die of COVID, get COVID, than white people? Easy, because they had lousy healthcare. If you had a pre-existing condition and you were in an affluent suburb, it was probably treated. If you're in a poor area, it wasn't. And that made you more susceptible to COVID and more likely to have a more severe case of COVID. And you could repeat that. Schooling, you mentioned it. It showed that, you know, the lack of families who didn't have high-speed internet, broadband, was so many of them were concentrated in the inner city and poor neighborhoods and neighborhoods of color. So we are trying to address this because I've been passionate about this for a long, long time. First, on a broad sense, I have something called the Economic Justice Act, would address across the board dealing with the inequities that have communities of color have suffered. And it puts over a 10-year period over $435 billion, more than ever has been invested into inner cities, in childcare, in healthcare, in housing, in training, and in high-speed internet, so every home gets it. And furthermore, what we're saying in the Economic Justice Act is that job training is essential. And we're trying to do this in the big, and we're trying to do this not, so that's a big piece of legislation. I'll send it to you, Jan, and you can send it to your whole groups, all the groups. I think they'd be interested in it. It's long term. In the shorter term, we are trying throughout these bills to focus on communities of color. Take the vaccines. We've said the first areas where these centers ought to be set up are in the poorer areas, in the areas for people of color, because they always have been at the back of the list. We're saying, and listen to this, in our infrastructure bill, that a significant percentage of the jobs should go to people who, it'll create like 10 million, if it's at its peak, 10 million new construction jobs. We're saying 40%, up to 40% of those jobs should go to people who don't have jobs, people have low paying jobs, even people who just got out of prison. So they'll have a ladder up. Construction jobs should be available to many more people. We are putting in every one of the proposals we have special preference for poorer communities and communities of color. As I said, on the vaccines and the testing, we also give money to special money to states and localities that have dedicated money for underserved and minority communities. They get an incentive. Here are some other things we do in this bill. We have 12 months of postpartum Medicaid coverage for mothers. Today, Medicaid pays for almost half of all births in the country. And it, again, disproportionately affects Black and Hispanic communities. We have a national health corps and a nurse corps to go provide doctors, nurses in underserved communities. We gave $7.6 billion to community health centers, CHCs, which are sometimes the easiest and quickest way to serve minority communities. And I'm going to give you another one that you may not think of. I am trying to get Joe Biden to forgive $50,000 of student debt. People say, oh, why do we have to do that? Because a disproportionate amount of the debt burden is on people of color. Many of them came from families who didn't go to college. They were taken advantage of by some of these awful for-profit colleges and others that said, sign up here, the federal government will pay for your college. And they never got a degree, they never got an education, they still have this debt. It's estimated 28% of the whole wealth gap in America is because of student debt. And listen to this. The statistics show that if you're a white graduate of college within 15 years, and I may have the numbers somewhat wrong, but it's the right thrust, 15 years, only 10% still have a debt load. If you're a black family, it's 9. If you're a black graduate, it's 90% still have the debt load. So that's an important thing to do, and Biden can do it with the flick of a pen. So we're looking at ways to make up for these inequities. And I would just say to some of my more conservative friends, probably who are on the phone here, we can't Zoom. Sorry, we don't go on the phone anymore. We only go on Zoom. But I would say we cannot have a society where half the society feels they don't have hope for the future. That does not how a democratic society. The top 25% is doing great. God bless them. But if you have the bottom half of society feeling no hope, feeling they can't get ahead, we're going to have real trouble. We need to do investment, and it's worth it.
Thank you. I'm going to jump into a related subject, which is immigrant rights. So immigrant families and individuals have been excluded from federal stimulus opportunities and have faced disproportionate job loss and trauma caused by family separation, fear, and cruelty. There is a great deal in the president's immigration bill that seeks to promote immigration and refugee integration and citizenship, and to protect vulnerable individuals and workers. What are your thoughts on the bill generally, and specifically on the codification of an interagency plan to address the underlying causes of migration related to human rights abuses? And how realistic is this section of the plan that rests on conditional cooperation in reducing such abuses?
Okay, again, these are great questions. I'm sorry, but they take a little bit of a longer answer. First, this is something I passionately believe in. My middle name is Ellis, Charles Ellis Schumer, named after Uncle Ellis for Ellis Island. My daughter, we named my daughter, her middle name is Emma, for the poet Emma Lazarus, who wrote on the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty, give me your poor, your tired, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. With John McCain, in a bipartisan way, and this is relevant, we wrote the 2013 immigration law that passed the Senate but didn't pass the House because the Tea Party blocked it. But it's basically the model for the Biden bill. In that bill, and in his bill, for instance, is a path to citizenship for all 11 million who are here. It's not that easy. You have to work, you have to pay back taxes, but you get to be a citizen, and you can start working and not worry about deportation immediately. In that bill, we accept workers who we need in this country. So we proposed in that bill, for instance, that any foreigner who studied STEM, science, technology, engineering, or math, and got an MA or PhD in STEM would get a green card stapled to their diploma. Many of our companies, many of your Westchester companies are desperate for these people. But it wasn't just high-end immigration. We are desperate for farm workers. We allowed people in. And, before COVID, even, fast food and other places were looking for workers. When we cut back on immigration, we end up with a society that's imbalanced, where too many people, the number of people working to the number of people retired, that ratio gets too low, and we end up hurting our economy like Japan or Italy or someplace like that. So I am passionate about this, and the Biden bill is a very good bill. It's quite close to the bill that McCain and I wrote in 2013. And I'm glad this is a merger of nonprofit and business. Business folks, Michael, you can help us. This can be bipartisan. How did I get with John McCain 68 votes in the Senate? Because the business community was very strongly for it. They need the workers. And we will need, this bill cannot pass on reconciliation because it's not just spending, it's all kinds of other changes in the law. So we're going to need the business community to encourage, particularly our Republican friends, to support this bill. We have the growers, the Western growers, one of the most conservative right-wing groups, desperate for this bill because they can't find workers to pick the crops. We have our tech industry, our finance industry, desperate for the higher end workers, and many others. So we have to pass this bill. Now, part of the bill says if you want to stop some of, make the conditions, particularly in Central America, where a large number of the immigrants who cross the border in Mexico are from, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras. If you are worried your kid is going to get killed by a gang, you leave. So a small amount, a relatively small amount of money can help stabilize these countries. And that has had support on both sides of the aisle. So I think it is doable. But this is a vital thing to do. We want to not just help the dreamers as much as we want to help them, not just get TPS undone, get TPS renewed, which we want to do too, that temporary protected status. But let me say one final thing. This is not just a moral imperative, which to me it is, as you mentioned. It's an economic imperative. When we did our bill in 2013, as I said, similar to this one, the CBO estimated it would grow our GDP 3.5%, more than any Republican tax cut, more than any Democratic spending program. You unleash immigrants, you let them work. They want to be Americans. They work so hard that the whole economy benefits. And it really gets me so angry that Donald Trump, excuse me, I'm not supposed to be that political, I'm sure there are some Trump supporters on this phone, but I have to say what I have to say. His nastiness, picking on immigrants, was one of the low points, not only of his presidency, which had many, but of, the American relationship. We've had bad periods before, the know nothings and the laws in the 1920s, but this was another very bad one.
Well,
Sorry.
Senator,
Passionate.
my grandmother's name is Libertaria, and like the rest of my grandparents, she came through Ellis Island as well. So,
Right. You can actually go to Ellis Island and get a copy of the manifest. My grandpa on my dad's side came in 1892, and I have a copy of him and his three brothers and sisters who came with him.
Well, thank you for that. I, as a reminder, and I don't need to remind you, there were certainly economic benefits of having a strong immigration policy and welcoming the immigrant community to all parts of our society, and
Yeah.
also to treating them fairly once they are in our economy, which is related to the federal $15 an hour minimum wage and other economic rights that all people should have. So I thank you. I'm going to hand this back over to Michael. We have a few more minutes. Michael, I'm supposed to close, but why don't you just ask your questions and close?
sure,
Okay.
these
Yeah. Go ahead.
are, Senator, these are common questions for both nonprofits and the business community. And a lot of people have asked about, frankly, the toxic atmosphere in Washington. So probably this is a good way to sort of wrap things up. Not only inter-party, but even small feuds within the respective parties. How can you help now in your leadership position kind of break this, thaw this ice, break this pattern that we're on where it keeps seeming to get worse and worse every year?
Right. Okay. Well, I want to very much do it. Let me talk intra-party first, because there's a lot of talk, all the fighting in the Democratic Party. So I have had a leadership team which meets Monday nights to discuss the week and the things we ought to do. It's 10 senators. You know who's on my leadership team? Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, probably our two most progressive senators, and Joe Manchin and Mark Warner, probably our two most conservative or moderate senators. And we sit around the table and we hash things out and we stay very unified. And not everyone gets their way. But when you can come together and actually talk it out and respect each other's position, that can happen. Now, that has stopped happening between Democrats and Republicans. You have very little interaction amongst us the way we used to. When I got to the Senate, there was much more. But there are ways to do it. You know how I got to be friendly with a lot of the Republicans? I went to the Senate gym and I learned early in the morning. I learned as I started going to the Senate gym that Democrats exercise later in the day and Republicans early in the morning. So there I was with the whole leadership group, not McConnell, but the others, early in the morning. And when you're a 60-year-old panting away on a bike next to someone else, the inhibitions fall away. What I hope we can do is institute more contacts amongst each other. What I hope we can do is start talking to each other. And I am going to try to find bipartisan proposals like immigration. As I mentioned, the first bill I put on the floor was the Restaurants Act, sponsored by Wicker, a Republican from Mississippi, and Sinema, a Democrat from Arizona. And right now I'm encouraging my Democrats, even on this COVID bill, which McConnell says his goal is to get every Republican to oppose, which I don't think makes sense. I've encouraged bipartisan amendments to be added to it. And we've added a bunch, and we'll add a bunch more. I think if we start talking to each other and trying to find our common ground, infrastructure, the Endless Frontiers Act that I mentioned, you know, that invests in the pure sciences, that's bipartisan. I'm a lead sponsor, and Mike and Todd Young are one of the rising young star Republicans in the Senate. We can start breaking through, and that's what I hope to do. There are some areas where we're not going to break through, like on this COVID relief. For whatever reason, McConnell is adamant. But I'm going to try to keep doing it, and the more we do it, it may build on itself. I hope it does.
Thanks, Senator. Megan's getting upset with us. We don't want to run over. So if you want to just give some brief closing remarks, and I'll just ask you this one question real quick. Is the filibuster dead?
Well, you know, the bottom line is we have to get things done. As I mentioned, I feel an economic, political, and moral imperative. And we're going to figure out the best way to get things done. And as I've said, nothing is off the table. Nothing is off the table. But if we can do it in a bipartisan way, so much the better. If we can't, we're going to have to sit down as a caucus and decide where to go. That's how I feel about that. And I do want to introduce Megan Glander, who runs our Westchester office from Peekskill, to those who don't know her. We're available to help you, whether you be a business or a nonprofit. She does a great job. Now, Megan, talk so they can see you. Can you put your picture on?
Hi, everyone.
Can we make her? There she is, Megan Glander.
Hi.
So people should get to know her because she's great. She's great, and she'll do a great job for your nonprofit, for your business. She'll help you. Our office is listed in it's in Peekskill, and you can look up the phone number, the email, everything else.
Thank you, Megan. You've been wonderful.
Thanks, Megan. Senator, any closing remarks real quick?
Yeah, I have faith in New York and faith in America. We've had difficult times. Look, I got to the assembly in 1975. I was 23 years old. New York City was in crisis, and it was written off. After 9/11, everyone wrote New York off. You know, and I worked hard to get the $20 billion out of George Bush, and that was bipartisan. To his credit, he kept his word. After the financial crisis, they wrote New York off. After Sandy, they wrote us off. They always write us off, and we come back stronger than ever. There's a need for large metropolitan areas where different kinds of people bump into each other, interact with each other, diverse people. People are still, there's a certain personality, whether you be poor or rich or in between, whether you be black, white, brown, Asian, you name it. People want to come here. This is where you make it. So we've had a tough year or two. We will bounce back, and I will do everything I can to help us bounce back as quickly as possible. So thank you for listening. Thank you for caring, and on to better things.
Thank you, Senator. Hey, Mike, give us the side-by-side, and Jan will take us out.
I cannot thank you enough for coming. I had the pleasure of reading your bio, and I was really, I'm a fellow Brooklynite, so I always relate.
Where'd you go to high school, Jan?
Midwood, and I know you went to Madison, so.
You're our rival. I tell people, I played basketball at Madison, but our team wasn't very good. Our motto was, we may be small, but we're slow.
And I was so impressed with the fact that you take it upon yourself every year to visit what I think are the 62 counties in New York State. And that is impressive that you made that commitment and you keep it. So we will consider this your visit in virtual times to Westchester.
Oh, I visit Westchester at least about once a month.
We look forward to seeing you in person for real next year, hopefully. And we thank you for everything you're doing for New York.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for listening, folks.
Thanks, Senator.
Good weekend.
You
Thanks,
too.
Jan.
Thank you. Thanks, Michael.